Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.
Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means it's the last radio hour of the week. Dr. Larry Arnn is my guest as we continue our deep dive into Winston Churchill's memoirs of World War II. We are in Volume 1, The Gathering Storm. And when we last talked with Dr. Arnn, Hitler had just invaded Austria. Let me go now to the day after Hitler has invaded Austria over the objection of his generals and his diplomats. And he makes a little speech about the Little Entente, which is Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia. And you said earlier in this discussion that these people are a mix of both East and West. And we could throw in Islam as well. If one looks deep into Kosovo, for example, it's primarily a Muslim country. So the Balkans are a mess, and Churchill knows all about the Balkans, and he knows about the Turks, and he knows about the Russians. He knows about this, and he says, this is a nightmare. Russia had proposed a conference about it, and that Chamberlain brushed it aside. What's that tell you about Chamberlain?
Churchill describes Chamberlain, and it's very different the way he describes the two of them, to Chamberlain and Baldwin. He thought that Baldwin, Churchill is disinclined to speak harshly about people, but I think he thought that Baldwin was a coward. Baldwin wasn't up to the job that he had. Chamberlain was made of much sterner stuff and therefore more attractive to Churchill. And that meant Chamberlain, he got it in his mind, finally, I'm going to have to focus on this stuff. This stuff's getting out of hand, and I don't want a war. And so he did some very bold things, and they were exactly the wrong thing.
That's what my conclusion was. He was bold but wrong.
Yeah, he inserted himself into things, right? I mean, first of all, somewhere along the way here in these months, there's an offer from Franklin Roosevelt to come help, and they don't take him up on it, right? How? When you're pressed, when you can count, when you look at the numbers that are coming into being against you, how can you not treat that like the most important letter of the year?
Yep.
And they basically replied, no, we got this.
You know what I learned as well in this is that in the middle of all this, between Anschluss and Munich, between the invasion of Austria and the invasion of Czechoslovakia, the Brits give the Channel ports back to the Irish. Now, you know this story better than anyone. I didn't know this until last week. And my wife's grandfather sailed into Cork with the first flotilla of destroyers in World War I. There's a monument to him there. I know all about Cork and how important it was in World War I to stop the U-boat. How in the world? And Michael Collins said, well, you must have the ports in 1922. Do you want to explain what were the British thinking?
Well, they didn't want any trouble, I guess. They weren't. There's something in Chamberlain. I don't profess to understand Neville Chamberlain, except I'm taken, have been for decades now, of the fact that Churchill respected him more than he respected Stanley Baldwin. Churchill respected things about him, I think, that made the disasters worse. You remember, he comes along pretty late in all this, right? All right, Germany has already passed the point where it will be essentially free to stop them. That was in the Baldwin years. But he had a stubbornness. One of the sources for Chamberlain is he kept a diary, and he wrote a lot of letters to his sisters, handwritten. And my wife has the great virtue. She was crucial to the Churchill biography because she was the one who could read Neville Chamberlain's handwriting. And so it was, we'd uncover a letter from Neville Chamberlain, and Martin Gilbert called out, "Penny, you get over here." And the letters are self-congratulatory and confident, and in a place or two, shameful. He gives an account of Churchill once. Chamberlain was very close to Lord Halifax, who, would have been prime minister after Chamberlain if Churchill had not. And Lord Halifax was a ditherer. And I think that the general outlook of these guys was, we want to preserve the British Empire, but we're long past the time when we can afford to fight a war. In other words, they think that the facts of nature have been repealed. There's a kind of utopianism in those guys. And they don't think, it's like unthinkable to them to do what they eventually did and had done repeatedly in their history, because they couldn't quite get their minds around the fact that you might have to do that or else you're going to be ruled by the Nazis. And that was unthinkable to them.
Well, that's what Churchill writes at page 251. Hitler had, quote, "the conviction that the men at the head of France and Britain would not fight owing to their love of peace and failure to rearm. They had been so scarred by what was a very scarring war," right? I was taking notes for a different project on the Battle of the Somme. The Brits had 20,000 men killed on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, and it went for 4 months. It's still kind of staggering to lose 20,000 of your young men murdered in one day in a battle that will go for 4 months. No wonder they don't want to go to war. I mean, I'm sort of sympathetic to this more than I was before I began to read it, but Hitler had their number. They were afraid of it again. They did not want to do it again.
Yeah, that's it. In the case of Baldwin, that's maybe sufficient to explain his actions. In the case of Chamberlain, there was some sort of undue confidence, and he had some boldness about him. I mean, when we get, in late September 1938, early October 1938, Chamberlain volunteers himself to fly to Munich in southern Germany and talk to Hitler about Hitler's assaults on the Sudeten area, the mostly German-speaking area of Czechoslovakia, where the munitions industry is and where the frontier is. And remember, Churchill mentions it in passing in this chapter, the Czech army is 3 times larger than the British army on this day. That's what they let go.
Wow.
And if you think, it's probable, but of course we don't know, that the German army in 1938, when they went into Austria, was not ready for a major action. They still had battles. They had battles in Poland to get ready, and they had months, to get ready. And so the French army was, by now almost as big as the German army, and their defenses were not perfected against the French invasion. So this German army, if the French had, blustered or gone into Germany, upholding a treaty they had with Czechoslovakia.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that. We should note that France and Czechoslovakia are agreed to defend each other, and they're on opposite sides of Germany. And Czechoslovakia's got 35 divisions and a line of fortresses that are enormous in terrain, which is difficult to take. And the French have got not quite as many men as the German, but the West Wall, the German West Wall, isn't built yet. It is, in fact, the ideal time to stop Hitler. It is the moment at which the Allies, or at least the French, who have a treaty with Czechoslovakia, could have said, we're throwing down, thus far no more, and Britain could have come in behind them and it would never have happened. And Well, we'll talk more about Arnn when we come back with Dr. Larry Arnn. Remember, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. If it's that time of year for your college kids, your high school kids who are bound for college, don't forget the applications, as well as all the online courses, a free subscription to Imprimis and everything else, including the Hillsdale Dialogues, are all at hillsdale.edu. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn on the Hillsdale Dialogue on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hey, it's Scott Bertram, host of the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour and the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast. I want to know, what do you think about the show you're listening to right now? Visit podcast.hillsdale.edu and click the survey pop-up to take our very first ever listener survey. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, and what you want to hear from us in the future. Visit podcast.hillsdale.edu and click the pop-up to take the survey. And thank you for listening.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt with Dr. Larry Arnn. Hillsdale Dialogue continuing. I think we got to reset a little bit of chronology, Dr. Arnn, for the Steelers fans out there. Let's make sure that we are anchored in the date so they can get them in their mind how this is unfolding. So when the invasion of Austria happens, which is March of 1938, and the Munich disaster is in September of 1938. In that period of time, in your opinion, Doctor, would Czechoslovakia and France, with the support of Great Britain, beaten Germany?
Well, of course, we don't know. They didn't do it. But it's a good guess. And I'll add something, by the way. Churchill talks about this at length. Stalin had a particular debt and affection for Czechoslovakia.
Yes. Yep.
Beneš, a great man, president of the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakian Republic at the time, he had warned Stalin that there was a German crowd in the Soviet army, and they were thinking of replacing Stalin. Now, it stands to reason there was such a crowd, because we've already talked about this. Since the end of the First World War in 1918, these Bolsheviks are hosting secret German rearmament, and they're using Russian factories, and there's technology transfers through that to Russia, and they're using Russian land for exercises and bases. And so there's this by now it's 1938, so it's 20-year-long connection between the Soviet and the German armies. And so one of the motives, there were many, for the purges of Stalin's purges, and Stalin, we've talked about this, basically killed everybody senior in the Politburo, and all the ones who didn't die of some other natural cause or some other way of getting killed, who were alive by 1938-39, Stalin executed them all. And it Beneš's communication is one of the triggers to start all that. And
so Churchill talks about it is possible, we do not know, it's a counterfactual, didn't happen. But he says, would Stalin have marched his troops through Hungary and Romania to come to the aid of the Czechs? He thinks he might have because of this relationship Dr. Arnn is referring to. But we don't know because of what happened. And before we get up to the actual disaster that is Munich, in the 5.5 months between the Anschluss, the invasion of Austria, and the Munich negotiation, Hitler carries on a propaganda campaign aimed at demoralizing the Czechs. And I wrote in my notes, it's exactly what Xi Jinping is doing to Taiwan right now, running airplanes over them, threatening them, continually yelling at Japan, yelling at us, yelling at anyone who says the word Taiwan. It's psyops at a very high level, and Hitler believed in it, and it was an all-of-government effort to try and scare the whole world into stopping what was, in essence, one guy who wasn't really supported by his military either. They just kept holding their breath, thinking someone's going to stop this guy.
Yeah. Well, they were, there were plenty of opinions about Hitler inside Germany and in the German army, but they were They were the guys who tried to figure out, if we fight here, can we win? And what? And the big question is, what if the French come at us, right? And their judgment was, we can't, and they'll take us down. We're not ready to do that yet, which is different than saying we won't be soon or we never will be, and different than saying we ought not to. There were some who said that. And, the plots to kill Hitler came
Beck
out of
quits.
the German army.
The guy named Beck quits and says, I won't have anything to do with this. So there are some noble Germans who won't have anything to do with it, but most of them are just afraid they'll lose.
See, Dietrich Bonhoeffer a lot of that is, some of that is old Prussia stuff, right? There's a Prussian aristocracy. There's still some of them around, by the way, and the Austrian aristocracy too. And they're not, Hitler's not their kind of guy, right? First of all, he's an Austrian. Second of all, he's son of a middle-level bureaucrat. Third of all, he was a corporal in the army.
Yep.
And so he's not their guy. Hindenburg, the president before Hitler assumed all power, he was from an older family, and he was the surviving main hero of the First World War, along with Ludendorff. And Ludendorff was kind of a Nazi. He mucked around with the Nazis quite a bit. Yeah, so there, these fissures inside Germany, and you have to, first of all, for Hitler, because Hitler, from January 1933 until May of 1945, Hitler lived 12 years and 3 months after he became chancellor, and in that time, he built Germany into the biggest single military power. He waged war all over Europe. He conquered much of it, and then he was destroyed. He was in a hurry. He got a very great deal done, both good and bad, for himself and Germany. And
there are a few men of principle in Germany who oppose him. There are also, I made a note. I'd never heard of Duff Cooper before. I don't recall that he's in Great Contemporaries, but he quits like Eden. We talked a couple of episodes back that Anthony Eden quit, and because he was disgusted with appeasement. And then Duff Cooper quits. We'll talk about Munich next week, but he quits in the middle of this. And Duff Cooper's an interesting guy. I don't know much about him. I don't think we covered him when we did Great Contemporary. So when we come back from break, we'll do that. Let me remind you, as we approach year end, of two things. First of all, Hillsdale is a not-for-profit. Hillsdale is a wonderful institution. Hillsdale is the Lantern of the North. And you can contribute to Hillsdale with your year-end giving, whether you've got a charitable trust, whether you just want to write a check. Everything you need to know about making a contribution to Hillsdale is over at their website, hillsdale.edu, along with the opportunity to subscribe to Imprimis, along with everything else having to do with Hillsdale, including the wonderful online courses, every one of the hundreds of Hillsdale Dialogues that we have done, and all the information you need to have your high school student, or maybe you are a high school student, apply to the great Lantern of the North up in Michigan, Hillsdale College. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt with the Hillsdale Dialogue. Dr. Larry Arnn is my guest. As we were exiting the last segment, I brought up the name Duff Cooper, and it's one that when I was reading The Gathering Storm, I stopped and said, I just don't know much about Duff Cooper, Dr. Arnn. Duff Cooper, do you have, when you were doing researches for Sir Martin Gilbert, did he come up much? I just don't know much about him. I read up, he very gallant, Western Front, Oxford, 1918, Distinguished Service Order, very brave man, served in Churchill's cabinet when Churchill became prime minister. But do you have much of a fix on him, Dr. Arnn?
Oh, yeah, he's all over the place. He's very tight with Churchill, especially beginning in about 1936. He's Minister of Information in Churchill's wartime government. After the war, here's the significant thing. Churchill wrote various letters about his defeat in 1945, his electoral defeat. And the gloomiest is to Duff Cooper. Duff Cooper was a friend. And his public, and basically, I think his chief understanding of that thing was the poor people have had a very bad time. Can't really blame them for trying something new. And anyway, we conservatives made this mess. We were in charge. Never mind that he didn't do it. His party did it. To Duff Cooper, he wrote that it was depressing to him that the soldiers voted for the socialist, and that he had heard that some of them did it in exchange for a carton of cigarettes. And so that was very unsettling to him, and it's to Duff Cooper that he wrote that. Yeah, they were close. And Duff Cooper is an important man for a long time and makes good judgments. Duff Cooper is in Churchill's second premiership in 1951 too, 51 to 55. And so they're tight. Yeah, and he's
now. I have to save time in this episode to present to you the Oxford Union. Duff Cooper is my bridge to that, and I did not warn you about this because I did not know it would have happened. The Oxford Union famously or infamously voted that they would not fight for king or country in the interwar period. Of course, they did fight for king and country when it came time. On or about the middle of November 16th, the Oxford Union resolved that Israel is a greater threat to regional stability than Iran, and that its actions are above the law, and it's a nuclear-armed center of a regime based on apartheid. So it appears that Oxford has reverted, Dr. Arnn, to what it was in the 20s.
Yeah. Partly that's the way, when I look at that, that famous resolution, will not vote for king and will not fight for king and country. These are kids, right? And they're just reading the news, and they're apt to pick up things that seem most iconoclastic. If there's a revival in Britain, then if that happens, which I pray for, then they'll be talking different in a few years. But that's right. And of course, remember, there's a lot of students in Oxford who are from the countries that are supposedly beset by Israel.
Yes.
And that's, so there's that too. But yeah, that's a shame. But, radical opinion is all over elite universities in the West, all over.
I was going to ask you, this is not going to be the case at Hillsdale College, but do you think our young people might have the same reaction to war that the young people of Oxford had to war after the Great War, the First World War, when, as I said, 20,000 people would die in a day? And there's going to be a recoil from that, obviously. We had 20 long years of war. It did not yield an obvious win, except for the destruction of Iran by Trump. And all praise to Trump for pulling the trigger on Operation Midnight Hammer. I should say the destruction of the nuclear program. The Islamic Republic is sadly still with us. I want to be accurate when I said the destruction of the nuclear program. We'll come right back and pick up right there. Do want to remind you all things Hillsdale or at hillsdale.edu. I mentioned it last hour. I want to mention it again as you make your year-end giving plans. Don't forget that Hillsdale is a not-for-profit 501c3. Donations are always welcome, but you do not need to make a donation to subscribe to Imprimis, the free monthly speech digest that arrives in your mailbox. Old-fashioned way, snail mail. Millions of people get Imprimis every month, and they get smarter when they read it, so add your name to the list over at hillsdale.edu. All the Hillsdale Dialogues collected at Hugh for hillsdale.com. Come right back.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, talking with Dr. Larry Arnn in this Hillsdale Dialogue about countries exhausted by war, and that includes ours and Great Britain's. But do you think that generally on campuses there might be the same sort of recoil from war as gripped the West after World War I?
Yeah, you have to remember that since the Civil War, we have not had a war where there were mass casualties. Now, the Vietnam War and the Korean War, that's about 50,000. But compare that population our size, back then it was probably getting on for 200 million. Compare that to Britain with its 55 million, losing 1 million in the First World War. So part of that trauma there is very serious. The body count was very, very high. In ours, the cost of our wars is expense and wearing and, the sort of constant war fatigue. And you sort of get used to it because there's war all the time. And it's not really commonly on the front page of the paper. And so I think we're shaped by that. And, there's movements in, I don't know exactly what the MAGA world is, except I know about Donald Trump. But there are people who have been affiliated with it, let's say, who think that, they're working their way backwards through all our wars now and thinking they were all a mistake. And, they're back through the Second World War now and the First, and then the next one will be the Civil War. And that's an old story. That comes up from time to time, right? Was it a mistake to get into the Second World War? Well, the first thing to figure out whether it was or not would be to study it. We're going to study it and reading this book. And
so
there's big arguments against it.
I want to ask how Hillsdale College students who are self-selecting for hard work and serious study, and everyone can find that over at hillsdale.edu, how do they respond when you bring the Marines in? You've had former Commandant Neller there. You've had my friend General Spies there. You bring in people. Victor Davis Hanson is often there, preeminent military historian of our time. I think that's a fair thing to say. Andrew Roberts is a great historian, but he doesn't exclusively work in military the way that Victor does. How do they respond to men who are very hard? I don't mean, I love Mel. I don't know General Neller, but I love Mel. But they're hard men. They know about what war is all about. How do they respond to it, 18 to 22-year-old now in Hillsdale?
Well, we've been told at various times that probably, given student body size, we have more kids join the Marine Corps than any college. And, we get 3 to 6 a year, and it's almost always the Marine Corps. And the reason is that's the meanest. My friend Bill McKern, who's on the mend and back at work now, having had a heart problem.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
His father was a Marine, and he was I had lunch with him in the dining hall one day, this years ago, and he said what you just said. How do kids respond to the Marine Corps? And I said, well, they're around all the time. A lot of them join. It's popular. We just had Decoration Day here, by the way, which is an old annual holiday here, which we've resurrected. It's for all the people who've served from Hillsdale College, which is quite a number. And it was apparently, I didn't get to go, I was out of town, but apparently there were about 300 people showed up, and it was very solemn and very good. My wife went. So, anyway, that day with McGovern, I said, the Marines are popular. And then we go upstairs, and there's the Marine Corps recruiting. And I said, here they are, Bill. You can talk to them. He said, they're here in the student union. And I said, yeah. He said, that's not a problem. And I said, well, I wouldn't let the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in here, but, of course not. And he talked to him for half an hour. He wrote a lovely article, The Military at Hillsdale College versus the Military at Harvard. And
I missed that entirely. I've got to go back and find in the journal.
Yeah, it's years ago, but it's that's and see, you have to get a sense of the college. First of all, we're here to learn, right? And they're young, and so they shouldn't be agitating about radical causes all the time. Right? Because they don't know enough to, They got to learn. And here's a golden opportunity to learn. And so we encourage them to work, right? And, it's fine. They can say what they want to. And but it isn't a place that's dominated by the political news of the day. Now, we've got some kids, they muck around, social media is everywhere, right? So they read everything. They know what's going on. But it's not the main topic. If you go to the dining hall at Hillsdale College, which is my favorite sport, and I always sit with the students, right? It is very seldom that I sit down and they're arguing about current events. They follow them. They know what's going on.
They should know what's going on, but I'll bet you it is something of a contact sport. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Don't want the episode to end without talking about this with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. I don't want to put words in your mouth. There is a noxious force rising on the right. I don't want to talk about the individual. I don't want to use his name ever. He's, as far as I can tell, ignorant and evil, but apparently has a lot of followers. And I'm alarmed by that. Do you see any of that on your campus?
Yeah. Well, I just last week, because it's been coming up, right? And we are always taking the temperature of the student body. And it's what we do for a living, right? And I'm teaching Aristotle next term. So I learned that there are apparently a few students who pay attention to that young man. And I said to Kyle, my chief of staff, I said, get them in here.
Good for you.
I want to talk to him. And, they can listen to him if they want to. I don't care. But they're members of our community. I want to understand what they're up to, right? And they're not styled to me to be followers of him, intrigued. And so, great. The point is, here's somebody, I believe he's a fool.
Well, he is.
I think he's working mischief for a living, which is not good for the character of anyone, including himself.
I think he's trying to exploit as well the murder of Charlie by moving into a zone that was occupied by a good man who was learning and trying to substitute a bad kid who has not learned anything for the good person's influence. In other words, he's taking advantage.
The cure for that is study great things and preserve your good intentions, right? And, especially when you're young, any time in your life, it's better if you find out things, get to the bottom of them. If you're going to take a strong opinion about something, learn about it and do that before you take the strong, especially when you're young. By the way, the young people, like these people who pass these bad resolutions at the Oxford Union or these demonstrations at elite colleges in America, the only way they can be important is to be used as a tool in a larger movement that grown-ups are running, right? It's a much better service to themselves to get themselves informed and also build the good habits to, know whether you know the truth of a claim that you're making or not. And
curiosity and the accumulation of facts is a wonderful habit to acquire. And indeed, that might be all of our New Year's resolution. More facts, more habits of acquiring facts, more Hillsdale Dialogues. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Thank you, Dr. Larry Arnn. Thank you, Adam and Harley. Thank you, Generalissimo. Thanks all of you for listening. All the dialogues are at HughForHillsdale.com. Talk to you on Monday on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.